Unfortunately, Norm's talk comes right after spring break, so it made for a bit of a more difficult time to advertise. And so maybe we'll have to have him back when not right after spring break. So I apologize for that.
That's fine.
But also I wanted to announce that on April 17th, Lisa Swallow will be here talking about corporate social responsibility. And our last talk will be May 1st, which is Mehrdad Kia. We'll be talking about Islam, covering Islam. So I think those should be interesting talks. There's also, we just got our poster for this summer. We're having an Environmental Ethics Institute this summer. And if you've been coming to these things, I've been advertising them the whole time. But there's a lot of interesting things. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Bill Chalupka. He was here on campus for a long time. But he's going to be up here with Daniel Kimmis and Andrew Light and a few other people talking about this sort of infamous essay, The Death of Environmentalism. So that should be a good talk. And Holmes Ralston, who's won several international awards for his work in environmental ethics and on science and religion, will be here with some other locally well-known people. Albert Boardman, John Hart, and a few other people will have a panel discussion. Also, there's going to be some evening lectures that should be really interesting. A woman's coming out to teach a course and give a talk on environmental aesthetics. And she's from the Rhode Island School of Design and is a native of Japan. And we'll talk about the aesthetics of the Japanese garden. So it should be a fun sort of intellectual event during July that I hope you can come to. So if you'd like to take a poster, I have some here for you. Okay? Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
And anybody else who comes in? Yeah. Great. Hi.
Passing out posters. And we're all set to go? I think from Norm's greetings, I don't think he needs an introduction to you both, unless you seem to know Norm. But Norm is founded Common Quest Mediation in 1993 with a focus on helping people interact more effectively. He is a founding member of the Montana Mediation Association, the Community Dispute Resolution Center of Missoula County, and Community Circles. So he's quite busy. Norm's research interests include community justice initiatives, Aboriginal justice systems, the power of question, and the creative process. So I'm looking forward to this, and Norm, it's all yours.
Thank you. Dane, grab a packet there from Heidi right behind you. Well, I see some familiar faces and I see some new faces, so I'm very pleased that you're here. It's a small group, but it's going to be a very spirited group. You've got a packet in front of you, and the first piece is our Community Circles brochure, which you can take with you, and Community Circles certainly is a restorative justice initiative here in Missoula County. And the second piece is our most recent newsletter, which you can take with you. And anybody who'd like to have more information about Community Circles, please come up afterward. I've got a sign-up sheet right here. And the third piece is all of the slides that you'll see today, because I don't like to, hi Liz, I don't like to have people feeling that they have to take notes when somebody is speaking. So you can scribble on these various sheets. You can turn them over where they're blank and you can write out a grocery list or write a letter to a loved one, anything you'd like to do. And if you take them home afterward and you have a shredder and you have a cat, you can shred them up and they make wonderful kitty litter. So the title is really loaded, Ethics of Community Justice Initiatives. I gave a talk about 1.5 years ago to some students at the Votech, and the title of my talk was The Ethics of Mediation. And I've always felt that I know what it means to be an ethical person. I think everybody does, but I've always been concerned about the definition of the word. So I looked it up and I came up with 5 different definitions. And I asked the students which one worked for them, and the students were pretty equally divided. So I think I know what it means to be an ethical person, but I still am always learning about the term ethics. Community. You see it every day in the Missoulian. What does it mean? It's used in a lot of different ways. To me, a community is a caring group of 2 or more individuals who have some overlapping interests. And that's a very broad definition, but it's one that has worked for me pretty well. Justice, it's a term that we see every day in the newspaper, here on the radio. Everybody knows what it means. Every once in a while, I go on Amazon and go to the book section, and I search for the term justice to see how many titles there are that have justice in them. Would anybody like to venture a guess how many book titles there are on Amazon that have the term justice in them?
212.
212. You're close. Anybody else? Thousands. Anybody else? 26,415. So this whole idea of justice, the concept, perhaps isn't quite as simple as we like to think. And the last word, initiative. We're not starting anything new with our Community Circles program. We're just lighting the kindling that's been laid by First Nations peoples for thousands of years. This is the way that they actually have resolved their difficulties, settled their disputes, using circle processes forever. And we're just learning from them and bringing this very powerful process into Missoula County. Now, what I'd like to do with our time together today is take a little journey through American history. There will be no test, but I'd like to start back with the Massachusetts Bay colonies and take a look at some of the types of communities that have been built in the United States, and then look at how they've resolved their difficulties, whether they use a formal legal system outside the colony or whether they resolve everything within the colony. And then we'll build this right up to the present day and talk about community circles. Massachusetts Bay colonies. Dedham, southwest of Boston, founded in 1636. And this was a common purpose community based on religious ideology. Everybody believed the same way. Built on Christian love and harmony, tolerating within their midst only those who were of one heart with us. They resolved their difficulties with mediation. If you didn't agree with the powers that be, you could leave or you could get expelled. And sometimes a whole group of citizens would leave. They'd break off and form their own community. It's amazing to me that Dedham lasted for 50 years. Think about it, 50 years holding people together just based on a religious ideology. It's pretty amazing. There was another type of common purpose community, one built on land. And Sudbury is a good example, founded 1638. The original settlers were each given a tract of land to build their house, and then the rest of the land was held in common. So crops were grown, cattle were run, chickens, pigs, whatever it took to sustain the community. Pretty amazing. This lasted 20 years, which I think is still a significant amount of time for people to work together this closely. Now, it really sounds nice to say that they resolved everything internally, that they didn't need courts, they didn't need lawyers, they didn't take all of their disputes outside the community. But if you consider what it meant to be a member of that community, it was probably pretty strict. And I don't think I would have been real comfortable being there with somebody telling me how to act on a daily basis. Okay? So there are pluses and minuses. Going down south to the Quaker community in Pennsylvania, Quakers had a holy community. Aversion to litigation expressed their commitment to love, order, and unity of the brethren. Litigation produced feelings subversive to the very purpose for which the religious society was formed. So they resolved everything internally. And they still do pretty much. We have a very strong Quaker community here in Missoula. It's important to note that the religious communities and those based on land resolved everything internally, and the issues were resolved by elders. Okay? People within the community who were respected. This goes right back to First Nations principles, where Native Americans and the Maori, Hawaiians, Bushmen, they all used people who were respected in their community to help resolve their conflicts. How different that is from what we do today, where we go outside our sense of community, whatever that is, and use lawyers who know nothing about the individuals who are involved. It's also interesting to know that all of the elders were male. I've seen no reference to any female in a community having a role of authority so that she could act as an elder.
In other than First Nations, you mean?
Pardon me?
In other than First Nations?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, good point. Because some were matriarchal in the First Nations communities.
Of the globe?
The globe, yes,
Of the globe?
the globe.
Okay.
But the
Just
ones
to-
here in the United States that we're talking about, the only reference I saw were to male elders.
For the First Nations?
No, no,
Okay, fine, thank you.
Massachusetts Bay Colony, all
okay.
these other.
Okay.
Sorry.
Quakers used women for their arbitration mediation.
They did. Good. Liz said that the Quakers used, and probably still use,
There are women's circles and men's circles and community circles,
it's wonderful, wonderful.
depending on the issue.
Yeah. So why did all of these communities of common purpose dissolve? Well, there were economic opportunities up in New England that couldn't really be addressed within a small unit of people. Religious dissent, diminished authority, the church and the elders, and there was a vacuum, and this was filled by the law. So mediation and arbitration, all of these internal ways of resolving conflict had been fine when people had a common moral bond. They all agreed that they had this moral binding that kept them together. They had common principles. But when people became strangers, this is when the courts and lawyers were able to come in and resolve difficulties. So down at the bottom it says, where community ends, law begins. This is worth thinking about. Also worth thinking about in terms of Missoula County and what community means either in the county or in the city or in any given neighborhood. Interesting. Where community ends, law begins. We have some of these common purpose colonies still in existence. We know that we have Mennonite colonies here in Montana. We have Amish colonies. Quakers, very strong meeting here in Missoula. The Mormons, of course, in the Salt Lake Valley, very strong presence there. And on the right-hand side, there are 3 colonies which you might not have known about as common purpose colonies. The Amana colony was based on similar ideology, but now we think of them as manufacturers of appliances. Everybody's heard of the Amana Man? Okay. Maytag colony, similar. Now we think of them as being manufacturers of appliances. Are there any cheese lovers in this group? Anybody like cheese? 1, 2, 3, 18. Okay. Maytag makes a wonderful, a killer blue cheese that's internationally renowned, and it's excellent. So if you like cheese, if you like blue cheese, go on the Maytag website and find out about their cheese. It's really good. And then we have the Oneida colony, started by John Humphrey Noyes. It lasted 2 years. And after 2 years, the members became a stock company, and they said, we're going to start making silverware. So they make stainless steel, and they make silver plate, and they're well known. I think the Oneida brand is known to most people. So these are some of the colonies that are still in existence today. If we look at another type of common purpose colony, we can look at one built on commerce. Let's look at Plymouth, Massachusetts, one of many. High level of commercialism, religious diversity, private land ownership. Everybody was out for their own capital gain. Law not only measured the extent of community fragmentation, it provided the strongest possibility of social cohesion. Yes?
Did it also not provide for the strongest possibility of individual gain and private land ownership?
Yes, yes it did. Yeah. Very much like we have today. Everybody's out sort of looking out for themselves as individuals as opposed to having a community that is bigger than any individual. Okay? This idea of fragmentation. You know, when you have lawyers involved, it tends to polarize people. And in this case, it certainly did when commercial interests were at stake. But then again, the law was the one thing that kept people together too. And I'm still thinking about this a lot. So the law can drive people apart, but it also provides the basis for allowing people to operate in a society. Provides some sort of guidance on how we should interact with each other. Let's go to the East Coast and talk about commercial interests. There was a whole area of commerce between New York and Philadelphia. And you can just picture all of the sailing ships going back and forth with lumber and various types of goods. Self-interest was generated, in this case, by a community of work and profit. And the people who were involved said, courts dispense endless law. The quality of a shipment of flour or herrings or the appropriate compensation for a wrecked ship was best determined by partners in trade. So rather than having attorneys outside the merchants decide the value of a wrecked ship, they decided to do this internally. So they started this community justice initiative and said, we're going to resolve these things, usually by arbitration, within our group of people who know about these issues. So what they were saying is that they valued their commercial relationships very highly. This is very important to them. Let's jump to after the Civil War. A lot of freed slaves. General Howard said, we're going to set up an arbitration panel. 3 people, one chosen by the government, one chosen by the planter, conflicts between the freed slaves and their previous owners, and one chosen by the freed slave. 3-person arbitration panel. And they figured that the freed slaves, the freedmen, would obviously choose a white man who was very intelligent to represent them. Surprise, surprise, they didn't. They chose one of their own. At which point General Howard said, this isn't working. So in his power position, he replaced all of the people chosen by the freed slaves with people of his own choosing. Discrimination? I think so, yeah. This is way back in the 1800s. It's pretty amazing. So planters tolerated arbitration panels as long as they controlled them. Very interesting. I never heard of the Knights of Labor. It's a prominent national union in the 1880s. They decided to establish their own court system. The working men are learning to despise lawyers and advocates and to eliminate law courts by establishing courts of their own. They have long perceived that at the hands of advocates, justices, and police, they get an immense amount of law, but no justice. Once again, we talk about what does justice really mean. They decided to do things internally, develop a community justice initiative. And then we have all of the immigrants who came to and populated our country. These people settled in neighborhoods where they felt comfortable. They could talk about what it was like in the old country. They could keep their culture alive, and they could also worry and be very concerned about how they were going to fit into the American society. So they were torn between the past and the present, but they felt comfortable in this type of environment. They certainly didn't share the American assumption that the best way to get things resolved was with courts and judges, because they didn't do that in the old country. They had a very good system. They had a padrone, I believe male, okay? Yeah, it must be, because that's with the P, okay. And this is the way they resolved their difficulties here in the United States in their ethnic communities. So once again, padrone equals elder, somebody within their community who helps them resolve their difficulties.
Globally, was it not pre-industrial or pre-1600s, I don't know when, for all cultures, elders? Celts, for example, or in 200 AD, was it not still, did not elders, were not elders hold the positions that you're talking about, the First Nations have, and that the immigrants from Eastern Europe and Europe brought with them? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Oh, indeed.
Oh, okay.
Did not this whole system of using elders go way back in Europe as well as with the First Nations parties?
Globally.
Globally.
Everywhere.
And not speaking with a lot of authority, I would say yes, it worked very well. when our society was a lot simpler than it is now? These are just things to think about. I'm not giving you any answers, but I'm saying these are some significant things to think about as we look at what's happening in our little valley. Okay. Chinese. According to the Chinese proverb, it's better to be vexed to death than to bring a lawsuit. Isn't that cool? The assertion of rights was not only disrupted, but it placed you above the group, the clan, the village, the family. And this was not appropriate. There's some Native American cultures where you don't introduce yourself by your name, you introduce yourself first by what clan you're associated with. Litigation, a degrading confession of personal failure. In our culture where it's so easy to file a lawsuit for a landlord-tenant issue, for a bad paint job, for an apple tree that's hanging over a property line and the apples are falling on the other side, it's so easy to file a lawsuit. The Chinese said it was a degrading confession of personal failure. And once again, they used somebody called a headman as their elder to resolve difficulties within their communities. Now, I've been to the Chinatowns in New York, San Francisco, and Victoria, British Columbia, and they're fascinating. I don't know a lot about them, but I have never, in my recollection, seen a lawsuit between two Chinese people in the public courts. They handle things internally. Exactly how they do it, I don't know. And if anybody does, I'd certainly be glad to talk to them later because I'm on a learning curve. Jewish immigrants, another fascinating ethnic group. Their religion was their law. And justice to them meant reconciliation, not winning over somebody else. They had a bet-din rabbinical court that dealt with family, civil, religious issues, so you have a blending of church and state in this case. They also had arbitration courts and conciliation courts, and one rabbi would set up a court here and another rabbi would set up a court here, and they're both plying the waters for people to come to their court, and they used the radio, so they had competing radio time. They called them radio courts, trying to get clients into their particular court. Pretty amazing. I wish I could have heard some of those things. There are communities today where Jews are restrained from engaging in litigation. The Hasidic Williamsburg community in Brooklyn, and I think fascinating import, the Diamond Dealers Club in Manhattan, which combined religion and civic and commercial aspects. So, if you had a dispute within the Diamond Dealers Club, you could leave or you could be expelled if you didn't resolve it. And when you were expelled from the Manhattan Club, that meant that you were expelled from every other Diamond Dealer Club around the world, because they're all over the place. I never knew this. So once you got kicked out of one, you could not gain entry into one in Hong Kong or Singapore. You were out. They handled everything internally. Pretty harsh. It apparently works quite well. Worldwide shaming, I guess you could call it, Liz?
Well, it creates incentives.
Pardon me?
It creates incentives to resolution.
There you go. Creates incentive. So, in the 20th century, people were getting very concerned with the law, that filing lawsuits was very expensive, took a lot of time, it was hard to get on the court docket. Sometimes issues were resolved by lawyers, sometimes they weren't, but it was expensive. So the bar decided that they had to do some reforming so they could stay in business. And they set up such things as small claims courts, public defender's office. One of the things that I think is neat is neighborhood justice courts, which usually met at night in a neighborhood center in low-income neighborhoods. And these neighborhood justice centers were usually staffed by law students or young lawyers who had very little experience. And what this did, in many ways, was set up a two-tiered system. So the people who were wealthy could afford to go out and hire counsel who was very experienced to handle their case. People who were not wealthy had another type of justice offered to them. In Missoula, we have the Montana Legal Services Administration, which does a wonderful job But when you think about the MLSA, you think about settlement conferences, which are settlements out of the formal court system. You think about arbitration. All of these are outside the bounds of what we consider to be the formal legal system. And there's a real question of whether these people are getting justice or whether they're getting equal justice to somebody who has the opportunity to pay the money to get into the court system. Just some things to think about. Karen, do you want to comment on that at all?
Probably, yeah.
Okay. Nail me at the end. Okay, that's fine.
Well, you're on the roll here.
I'm on a roll. So we do have some alternatives today. Mediation, arbitration, you can stack them and you can go to mediation. If that doesn't work, you can go to arbitration. If that doesn't work and it's not binding arbitration, then you can go to court. You can also rent a judge, somebody who's retired from the bench, and say, we'd like to have you listen to the evidence in this case and help us decide how we should resolve it. You can have a mini trial. You can hire a retired judge to get the parties together without discovery and listen to this person's case and this person's case and say, based on my 50 years of experience, this is what I think would happen if you proceeded in the formal legal system. Okay, this is my best guess. A little mini trial, a lot less expensive, can be done quite rapidly. So they were concerned about some of the responses they'd had to what was currently the legal system, and they were trying to do something to offer some alternatives. Well, there's a different way to look at this whole idea of justice. What we're talking about in the formal legal system is retributive justice, and this means punishment. Restorative justice is about healing, and it was developed in Mennonite communities in the 1970s, once again based on First Nations principles. And restorative justice, as I say, focuses on healing people and relationships rather than just punishing people who have gone outside the bounds of the community norms. If we look at the difference between these two types of justice, on the left is our current court system. It's focused on the offender. Victims don't have any part to play. Retributive justice asks three questions. What law was broken? Who did it? And what punishment do they deserve? Restorative justice focuses on the victim, but it also cares about the offender and the community. And this asks three questions. Who has been hurt? What are their needs? And whose responsibility is it to meet those needs? So there's an accountability for the person that has caused harm. They have to take responsibility, and if there's some restitution to be paid, they are included in restorative justice. But the focus is on these people who've been left out of the formal system so far, the victims of crime, the people who have been harmed. In restorative justice, crime or misdeeds are a violation of people and relationships, not of the state. Somebody knocks down 5 mailboxes in your community, in your neighborhood, and they're teenagers and you know who they are. They're charged with a crime and it becomes a crime against the state, when actually the harmed parties are the people whose mailboxes were knocked down. So restorative justice said, let's talk about the people who have been harmed, let's talk about the relationships between these teenagers and the people that they caused harm to. Focuses on the harm done and needs of those who have been harmed. Restorative justice, violations create obligations, responsibility to make things right. In Southeast Pacific cultures, when you have a dispute, it's called getting tangled up. And I really like that metaphor. And when you resolve that conflict, it's called disentanglement. Isn't that neat? You get the relationships worked out so that you're back on a good solid ground. You focus on the relationships. You focus on the idea that everybody is interconnected. Nobody is isolated. Restorative justice involves engagement of the victims, the offenders, and, as I say, very important, the community. So you've had your mailboxes knocked down. There's definitely a victim, the people who are harmed. There's somebody who's done the harm. What does a community's role have to say in this particular instance? The community should be asking, what have we done as a community to allow this situation to have occurred? So the community is very much a part of restorative justice. They have a responsibility. There's no such thing as a victimless crime. We get a lot of MIPs in our community circles program. These kids have been drinking, they've been picked up. If they've been driving, they haven't killed anybody. So there's no defined victim, except the fact that I, as a community member, am a victim, and our community is a victim. So victims, offenders, and the community, they're all involved. My involvement in restorative justice started in, about 1999 when I saw a video called Circle Sentencing shot in the Yukon, and some of you already know this story. The main person was Judge Barry Stewart in Whitehorse, and indeed, people sat in a circle. They used a talking piece so that everybody had equal voice in the circle. The case that they showed was a man who was an alcoholic, had beaten his wife. Well, the circle involved him, his wife, his kids, his clan members, and everybody in the community who had been impacted by this person's misdeeds. And they used the talking piece and went around, and everybody had an opportunity to say, this is how this individual impacted me as a neighbor, clan member, what it might be, whatever it might be. And then, after several times around the circle, people said, we think you're a really good person. These are the good things about you. We want to bring you back into the community. You've gone out and you've chopped wood for elders who couldn't do it themselves. When you have a good hunt, you provide food to people who can't supply their own. And then, as they go around, they say, this is what we think, as a group, as a community, you should do. You should go get alcohol treatment, you get sexual assault treatment, whatever the treatment would be, and we want you to come and be a member of our community. We want you to participate, we want you to cut the wood, we want you to help work with the youth of our community and share with them your experiences. And when I heard this video, I said, something important is going on here. So in 2002, I called Judge Stewart and I said, Barry, you know, you shot this video in the early 90s. How's it working? And he said, Norm, when we started this program, the jail in Whitehorse was filled to capacity, and the powers that be had decided that they had to build another jail. Does that sound familiar? Mm-hmm. Yeah, all across the United States. Now, about 9 years later, the original jail in Whitehorse is filled to less than 50% capacity, and the new jail is empty, and the powers that be are trying to decide what to do with it. And I said, something important is happening here. He said, what we've done is allow justice to operate in the community rather than bringing all the community members into our formal legal system. And this is the impact that it's had. This whole idea of using circles, now called peacemaking circles, has gone all the way across Canada, once again First Nations principles, down into Minnesota, St. Paul, Minneapolis, by the name of Kay Pranis, and some of you recognize that name. She was with the Department of Corrections for many years. She's become a good friend. She's come out here to give talks in Montana. And I said, whatever time and energy I've got left, I'm going to try to bring this process into Montana, hence the start of community circles. It's that powerful a program. A little bit more about our particular program. We are a 501c3. We're staffed by trained volunteer circle keepers. We're all volunteers. And indeed, we sit in a circle, trained circle keepers with a victim, an offender, or both. We use a talking piece to ensure that everybody has equal voice. Everyone's equal. If there's a coach, a teacher, a judge, it doesn't matter. Everybody's equal. The only person who has any power, if you want to call it, that is the person who holds the talking piece. And this is a really nice leveling when you get a teenager with some older person who has a PhD or is very wealthy. Those people have no clout. The teenager's got the right to use the floor to tell his or her story. We don't judge, very important in our process. What is said in circle stays in circle, it's confidential, and any decisions that are made by the group. We provide a safe place for victims and offenders to tell their stories. We provide a caring community for the people who feel isolated in our culture, and there are many of them who feel like they're just out there alone. We help uncover the underlying causes of crime. So we get people who are in for MIPs We find out what's going on in their lives so that we can help them move forward in a better way. We call it metaphorically to move to a better life path. We help people heal, to put things right. If somebody feels isolated, they don't have any remorse about doing damage to another person. But if they're a member of a community, they're not going to go out and strike a member of that community because they know them. A lot of people come to us and they don't have any community. We provide that sense of community so they can go forward. So far, we've provided a safe place for victims and offenders to tell their stories. We sit and listen to the words and the feelings. We've helped people develop closer bonds with their supporters. Just recently we had that instance. We've helped people get lined up with support for getting their GEDs. We have a personal contact at the job center, so we can refer people to a person over there for job counseling. We help people develop a positive life plan. And the nice thing about what we do is we support people on a continuing basis. I'm in contact with people who we worked with 2.5 years ago. So instead of going to a treatment program, after your 6 weeks you're cured, you go back into the same environment, we provide a continuing source of support for these people, which is what they really need. Different from the formal legal system. A couple of anecdotes that might be of interest to you, and I think we've got time for these. About a year ago, had a young man, he was 22, and he was there for an MIP or multiple MIPs, minors in possession, no, DUIs it would have been. And his supporter, one of his supporters was his cousin, a male, and his cousin's wife. And we went around and around, and the cousin kept calling our client, I'll call him our client down, say, you're a ne'er-do-well, you've never made anything in your life, you don't want to go to college, you just go out and party all the time, you're just working temporary jobs. And I said, whoa, this is important to let people vent. That's cool. We're never quite sure where these things are going to go. And then there was silence, and the cousin looked right at our client's eyes and said, there's some things you ought to know about our family. He said, our grandmother set the hurdle height for success so low in our family that anybody who tried to rise above that was kicked out of the family, ostracized. That's why there continues to be so much alcoholism and drug abuse in our family. And the cousin said, I decided I didn't have to play by those rules anymore. I said, I can break that chain. So I decided I was going to go to college and I'm going to graduate this next spring. And you can also. And this is the first time this person, our client, had an opportunity to hear this about his family. I don't know whether it's made a difference, but it certainly didn't hurt. Did we do anything as circle keepers? No. What we did was to provide a good space where people could talk about these things. Had a 17-year-old girl involved in a major automobile accident. She was a passenger, a good friend was driving. Both ended up in the emergency room. They were both drinking, so they both got MIPs. The driver was very severely hurt, facial scars, pretty bad things. Our client was not that severely hurt, although there was a lot of blood. So she came to the circle with another supporter, and we started talking about things such as the guilt she feels because her friend got so much more severely injured than she was. We listened. Whatever they wanted to talk about, we were there to listen. Our second circle conference took place 2 days after the 1-year anniversary of the original accident. And our client and her supporter came in and sat down, and they could tell that something was going on, something was different. And as we commonly do, we say, what's going on? Bring us up to speed. On the exact 1-year anniversary of the original very serious accident, our client had been driving and had been involved in another accident. She had slid her car down a bank, possibly up on the side, I forget the details. So she's there for an MIP. We start talking, minor in possession. So we start talking about whether there is a God, whether there isn't a God, why did this happen to me, is there a Satan? And we started out with an MIP, but we gave them the space to talk about something very important to them, most interesting. Another one. got a call from a mother, said, my son has been arrested for shoplifting, along with 4 of his 15-year-old buddies. They were shoplifting Coricidin at Walmart. Can we convene a circle? This was not court referred. I said, sure. So we had a circle of probably 18 people. And we started out by using the talking piece. We usually let somebody bring something of significance as the talking piece. We've used braided belt buckles. Just this last week, a young man brought a picture of his mother. That was the talking piece we used. So we had this circle, and each of the boys in turn said, that was a really dumb thing I did. I was really afraid when the cops came. I'll never do that again. All the things that you might expect from kids at that age, and they're all good boys. And then the talk started going to some of the pressures that they feel in their school system. And we talked about this, and it was the first time parents had really gotten an earful from a lot of kids the same age about what was going on in the school system. And then they started talking about the fact that marijuana is quite available in the school system, or it's not in the school system, but it's available to kids this age, and it's pretty common that people are using marijuana. And you could see some of the parents' eyes light up and say, oh, because this is the first time they might have ever heard this. I still remember one parent would say, I'm really concerned because it's illegal. And another parent would say, I've heard it's a gateway drug. And another parent would say, what's the big deal? So it was really interesting to be in that circle. And it's the first time that the kids have been able to talk to their parents on this level about things that mattered to them. First time that the parents were able to talk to their kids and say, this is what concerns me. Not court referred. At the end of our 2.5 hours, which is common for a circle conference, I said, what do you want to do? And everybody in the room said, we want to have another circle because it's such a good place to talk about these things that are of importance to us. That's pretty cool. We provided the space. We call it magic, what happens, but we just let it happen. One more. Gal called me, middle-aged person, not wealthy, said, young man stole my van, burned it, pushed it into the Bitterroot River. He's going to court on this charge, and I want to have a chance to face him in court and talk to him. I said, okay. So this is from the victim's side. And she and I spent a number of sessions talking about what she wanted to say in court, helping her get her words straight, and we indeed did go to court. And I think it's the first time this particular district court judge has ever had a victim come in and say, I want to talk to the person who did me harm. But he indeed said, yes, you can do it. She stood up there and faced the young man who did this harm to her, this young man she'd never seen before in the whole process. She had never seen what he looked like. And she was able to tell him the impact that this person's misdeeds had had on her life. Very powerful moment. I was standing outside with this person, the victim, our client, just talking, and the young man and his mother came out. They walked right up to the person that had been harmed, and they both said, thank you for your courage. It was very powerful. He's making his restitution payments. They've moved out of state. And she is keeping in touch with him, and he's doing very well. He's on a healing path as opposed to a punishment path. So, just to summarize what we're doing in the Community Circles program, we're shifting responsibility from the state to the families and to the communities, because this is where it should be for a lot of family and community issues. So we're reinforcing the family and the community as really the cornerstones of our society. And we're not an alternative to anything. You hear the terms non-legal, extra-legal, legal, alternative, even the term ADR, which means alternative dispute resolution. That's how I got into the mediation business, ADR. Well, Community Circles isn't an alternative to anything. It's a parallel to what the formal courts are doing. We say that we should be handling a lot of family and community issues instead of having those go to the court, so that the formal court system can focus on what it was designed to do, which is to provide for the safety of our citizens. We feel that this is our responsibility to take on some of these types of issues. We like to think of ourselves as a partner with the formal system. We're saving money for the taxpayers of Missoula County, and in a very real way, we are saving people's lives because we're giving them hope. I think this is probably one of the most important things we do. Just to finish up, I'd like to just read a comments form from a young man we worked with this last week, caught for MIP and stealing a street sign. So he's in the formal system. This is what he wrote after 3 circle conferences. Community Circles program has given me a whole new outlook on life. Not only the problems I had with the law were talked about, but also my personal problems. We discussed the good and important things in my life and talked about ways to improve. My supporters were amazing. Their stories about their struggles and hard times has given me an inspiration to get my act straight together now before I get in a hole, H-O-L-E. Circles program is an inspiring place that more people who are getting in trouble should go to discuss their problems, helping them get in touch. This is the type of comment that we standardly get. I think the 2 comments that people have made for the last 3 years, number 1, I can't believe you guys are sitting here as volunteers listening to my story, because we don't listen very well in our society. Second, it's so nice to be in a non-judgmental space. These 2, I think, summarize what we're trying to accomplish in the Community Circles program. It's working. We want to get the word out, and we're hoping that we can grow, not in terms of size of budget or anything, but in terms of the people who are aware of what we're doing so they come and make use of what we have to offer. Our services are free. We just have to get the word out so victims, people who have been harmed, offenders, neighborhoods come and say, we've got a situation we'd like to convene a circle about. Would you be willing to help? And we'll say yes. Dane? I'm used to having little discussion groups. I'm sorry I've been talking, but...
We have a few more minutes to see any questions.
What about with landlords and tenants?
There's no reason that circles couldn't be convened. I can't think of any reason. Anybody else? Yeah.
I can think of a reason.
Karen.
Judge Orszak. Yeah, I'm Karen Orszak. I'm Justice of the Peace in town. What happens in landlord-tenant cases is you have people who file against each other in court, and the first thing that happens from the court's perspective is mediation is set for people to try to settle their case. Now, mediation isn't a circle, okay, but a mediation is a process to try to solve a problem outside of the legal system.
So that this young couple being evicted by someone I'll characterize as a slumlord.
Yeah.
Justice unjudiciously has been evicted and fined for damage that is not their fault. Mm-hmm. They have no money for, and they have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. And they're 21. They don't have it to do. Because he is guilty, even though he frightened first, he's come down and said, well, I'll settle outside and let you have 3 months free, 3 weeks. You can stay 3 weeks without rent, and I'll give you a deposit back. So that's the situation. Do they have a chance to go to this thing you're talking about?
Is there a case filed in justice court already?
They have to show up in court.
Yeah.
They have a court date
Yeah.
for this eviction notice.
Yep.
Is that what you're speaking of, where they'll mediation will occur?
The process is they go to mediation first, and if mediation doesn't work, then they end up in court.
So with an eviction notice in court, my understanding is they're going to court for the eviction notice. Is there a place they can get
If I may
Yeah,
interject possibly, this could possibly be carried on afterward.
Yeah.
We have one more person who had a question about what we're talking about. No, that's fine. But I want to be sure that we get your question in.
I work on sustainable growth and transportation issues,
Mm-hmm.
so hence go to a lot of city council related meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's working well at all, the way we make community decisions. It's people that are sitting in rows and maybe making a quick public comment, and then council can't respond. And there's just a lot of stuff seems to build up. Can these types of things, I mean, how can we incorporate more of this type of thing on a community and citywide political level? Could it just be citizens going out on their own and gathering the people who are affected by the decision, sort of by-stepping a little bit of the normal process, or maybe changing the process?
I think they're good opportunities. I would like to see trained circle keepers in every neighborhood in Missoula, so that when the mailboxes get knocked down, you don't automatically call 911. You call and convene a circle. And that's going to take some training, which we're working on. And I would think that the same opportunity exists for people who are in leadership roles in our city and in our county. Absolutely. Thank you. Liz.
It goes beyond the circle process. What Bob's asking for and you're describing is an attention to increasing the civility of how we work together.
Right.
It might require a circle. It might simply require that people learn to listen to each other and communicate effectively.
You bet. Public hearings have nothing to do about hearing. They have all to do about, this is what I'm going to say next, and I'm focused on the impact of my words. In circles, you listen, because you know the talking piece is going to come around to you, and you're going to have an opportunity to speak, and everybody else will listen respectfully. Simple, yeah, but powerful.
I've been involved in this, and they characterize it as consensus.
Just, I think, Patricia.
I just have a nuts and bolts question. I mean, how do you, where do you get the money to do all this? I mean,
We're unfunded
well,
for 3 years. We're hoping to be able to get funding this year to hire one staff person and have a dedicated place to hold our circles.
yeah.
Our needs will never grow much beyond that. We're not going to grow into a huge organization. We're all volunteers. We just need somebody to do the coordinating work that I've been doing. Dana, I'm going to turn it back to you because of our time constraint.
Well, let's just thank Norm for coming.
Thank you.